As I noted in part one of the introduction, almost all of the growth in human population right now is occurring in developing countries as a result of a significant difference between their birth rates and their death rates. On this first chart we see here a line indicating the birth rate of human population in various countries and the death rate for those same countries. As you can see, the countries that have the largest difference in their birth rate and death rate happen to be the sub-Saharan Africa, Western and Southern Asia, and Latin America. And it's this difference, this large gap between the birth rate and the death rate that's causing a large population increase in these countries. When we get out into these areas down here near the bottom of both of those curves, we see that we have the more developed countries of North America, parts of East Asia, and Europe. And in these countries, the difference between the death rate and the birth rate is so small that there's relatively little population increase. And in fact, in Europe, there's actually a negative population increase because their death rate has exceeded their birth rate. So the critical population problem that we have in the world right now is due to the differences in the birth and death rates in developing countries. But as I also noted in the last video, the key to solving the birth-death rate ratio issue is in improving the welfare and affluence of these very same countries. If we can help to improve their circumstances and improve their living conditions, then, like in the developing countries, the birth rates of these countries will begin to decline and hopefully help stabilize the world population problem. So how do we do that? Well, that brings me to the second graph that we have here. This graph is a graph of something called the dependency ratio. The dependency ratio is the ratio of employed working people to unemployed or unable to be employed people. Typically, they define the dependent people in a population as those under 18 and over 65. So by looking at the relative ratios of those aged populations in a country, you can determine what their dependency ratio is. What's interesting about this graph is that if you look at the various curves for the various countries, you'll see that the dependency ratio has been coming down since the 1970s, and this is a result of the fact that countries have become more productive. All right, but you'll note as of about 2010, for a number of high-income countries and others in the East Pacific, East Asia, and Pacific regions, the dependency ratio is going back up again. The reason for this is because of the aging of their population. The baby boomers, primarily in the developed countries, and others are reaching retirement age, and as they reach retirement age, there are more dependent people than there are non-dependent people producing goods and services to take care of them. And this problem will become exacerbated as we go out beyond 2020. Right now, in the time which we are living between 2010 and 2020, we have a bottoming out of these two trends. We have during this decade the lowest dependency ratio that we have had in the world and will likely have in the near future in the world. So this window of opportunity here is called the demographic window, and it's a window of opportunity because during this particular decade, more countries will have more disposable income to help devote to the problem of the lack of affluence in developing countries. So if we are going to try and address the issue of population growth by helping to improve the circumstances of people living in developing countries, now, this decade between 2010 and 2020 is the optimum time in terms of disposable income in the world to help address these issues. So what is being done to help try and address the issue of poverty and lack of affluence or even of good living situations in many developing third world countries? Well, as it turns out, back in 1990, the United Nations convened a panel of countries who developed something called the Millennium Development Goals. These Millennium Development Goals were meant to be standards by which progress of developing nations could be measured to see whether or not they were becoming more affluent, if their conditions, living conditions of their people were improving. An example of one of these goals is the one shown on this chart adjacent to my picture here. And this chart shows the mortality rate for children under the age of 5. That is, how many children under the age of 5 will die out of 1,000 live births. And as you can see, the numbers are fairly significant in the poorer nations of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Asia, and other parts of the world. And we can also see that the goal that was set for this particular objective, which is the yellow line, in most cases the yellow line represents about 50% or more reduction in the infant mortality rate as a goal to which these countries will attempt to reach by the year 2015. Beginning in 1990 and up through 2005, snapshots have been taken of the progress of these countries towards that goal, and as we can see, there has been some progress in places, in all of the places, but if they're going to make the goal by 2015 that they've set for themselves, some countries, most notably sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia, are going to have to make some significant increases in their progress towards the goal. Other goals that are part of the Millennium Development Project are to help reduce poverty, to reduce hunger, to improve education and make it accessible to not only males but also females, which is not true in many countries, to increase access to good, clean, drinkable water, and to improve access to health care and most notably family planning. However, sometimes an attempt to do something good for a country can backfire with unintended consequences. One of these attempts to do something good for developing countries was to make available to them money to improve their infrastructure, their manufacturing infrastructure, their social and other resource infrastructure, so as to improve the living circumstances of their people. So that they'd have money to build dams to generate hydroelectric power, or clear land to farm, or dig mines to excavate resources that could be used to provide funds for those countries. But unfortunately, what has occurred is that these mammoth sums of money that were lent also engendered mammoth sums of interest. And now some 10, 15, 20 years after those initial loans, the interest alone on these loans are becoming as much as 50% or more of a country's income. That's money being used to pay back interest on a loan that could otherwise be used to help improve the country's people's circumstances, to help build hospitals and provide police services and other necessary social services to these people. So while it was originally a noble idea to provide them money to do the things they need to do, if now it becomes a handcuff that prevents them from doing what they need to do, that's not a good thing. And it's a problem that, that the United Nations and the rest of the world needs to grapple with and to come up with good solutions to deal with. And the chapter is going to talk about some of the proposed solutions to that particular problem. And finally in this chapter, you're going to read about a case study in which many of the Millennium Development Goals were actually put into practice to see if in fact they achieved the results that are projected for them in terms of dealing with the world population problem. That case study occurred in a province in India called Kerala, which borders along the Arabian Sea here, as you can see in the bigger graph that we have. And in the province of Kerala, the government officials did many of the things that were outlined in the Millennium Development Goals, and some additional to that. Land reforms were put in place to give people private ownership of land and provide incentive to be productive. Children were given access to education, both boys and girls. The caste system, which was prevalent in India, was outlawed so that there was no prohibitions on what people can and could not do in the exercise of improving their lives. The literacy rate, as a result, increased to 90% in Kerala, where it hovered only around 50% in the rest of India. Life expectancy in Kerala increased by 15 years over the average life expectancy in the rest of India. And most importantly, while the fertility ratio, the ratio of the number of children that a woman will have in her lifetime, which was about 2.8 for average of the entire country of India, was reduced all the way down to 1.8 in Kerala, which is a significant difference. It took it from being 1.5 times, it basically changed the rate of population increase from 150% to less than 70%, which if applied to the entire world would help to quickly stabilize the population of the world. So the Kerala case study shows that improving the circumstances and the affluence of a people does in fact help to stabilize their population. And so therefore more effort has to be made to implement this, not only for the good of the people and because it's the morally right thing for the world to do, but because it will also help save the world by preventing it from being overpopulated. Well, that's it for chapter 8 and 9. Again, there's some, to my mind, some very interesting material in there. But more importantly, it begins to put a real human, man as your neighbor type of imprint into some of the issues that we're studying about in this course. We are taking it from the realm of biology into the realm of sociology and psychology, and emphasizing the fact that any solution to the problem of environmental destruction and the prolonging of the life of mankind on Earth is going to require a comprehensive solution that brings in all of the different sciences, all the different humanities, all the different social sciences that are available to man to help address this very important issue. Thank you and good night.